Hello, and welcome to this week's episode of A Mic on the Podium with me, Michael Seal. Today, I conduct a conversation with a conductor who was born in South Korea. She shot to fame at the age of 11 when she won the 5th Rostropovich International Cello Competition, but has now gone on to a very successful career as a conductor. After a spell as the music director of the Qatar Philharmonic, since 2017 she's been the chief conductor of the Trondheim Symphony Orchestra in Norway. It's a very great pleasure to welcome Han-na Chang. Han-na, it's incredibly nice to see you again. How are you?
What a pleasure, Mike. I'm so happy and thrilled to be on your podcast. Thanks for having me.
It's not a problem at all. I say meet again because we met when I was in Trondheim in October, and you were, well, let's say you were stuck there, weren't you? Because, you know, you'd in between bouts of conducting your orchestra in Trondheim, rather than fly back to the US and have 2 weeks quarantine and then fly back to blah, 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 blah. You just stayed there and you came to my concert, and it was lovely to meet.
That's, yeah, absolutely correct. I wanted to avoid another 10-day quarantine by staying put in Trondheim. And it was lovely to see you. You're a frequent guest of our orchestra, of Trondheim Symphony Orchestra, where the members really, really love working with you. And it was such an impressive program of film music that you conducted. I mean, I think I fell in love with that wonderful music all over again. It was magic in the air.
Well, I mean, the audiences seem to really, really enjoy it. And I know the orchestra loves playing it. Well, every orchestra loves playing it. You know, from John Williams to, you know, we did this beautiful little cue from Up, which was just a very small chamber orchestra sized thing, but everybody just seemed to love playing it. And yeah,
and that was so charming. And it was really a wonderful program. It had a nice connection and nice musical sort of logic and flow into it. I really loved it.
Good. And we're going to go, as you know, because I know you've listened to a few episodes, probably through being stuck in hotel rooms for a long time.
Yes.
I know, or you'll know that I always go right back to the beginning. And the beginning is South Korea. That's where you were born. And, you know, I've read on Wikipedia, and, you know, already before I pressed record, I discovered that something was wrong on Wikipedia. But it says that you started the piano at the age of 3 and the cello at the age of 6. Were your mum and dad musicians? I mean, was music a big thing?
My dad loves music. He loves Beach Boys, Beatles, you know, all the classic great pop music. So we had that going on. And then my mom is a classically trained composer.
Oh, wow.
And she used to compose all these really, really cool music for like string quartets and for piano and orchestra, to something that sounds, when Prokofiev is a little bit more avant-garde.
Right.
Fantastic. Although she has stopped composing ever since I came along, I think. So I feel very guilty about that.
Oh dear.
But so she was a composer, and she was frequently giving lessons at home. So we had a piano at home. We had this pop thing going on with my dad, and then classical music. And every day I came home from kindergarten, I would put on the Peer Gynt suites. I absolutely adored that music, the story. And the other favorite record was, of course, Pablo Casals playing the Bach suites. We had the big LP at the time. And I just couldn't get over how personal it sounded. I had no idea who Pablo Casals was. Bach, that's just Bach, is Bach, whoever that is. But this music was really getting to my soul. And I'm an only child. So my parents decided that I would somehow study an instrument so that I can have a lifelong companion and friend. They never imagined that I would be a professional musician. So I started on the piano banging away when I was 3 years old. And I told my mom, I don't remember it clearly, but I have some memory of it. I told my mom, I don't like piano. It's too big for me. I can't reach the ends of the keyboard. My feet are just dangling. I can't, press the pedal. That's what makes it sound so fun. So my mom got me a small cello. It was a quarter-sized cello. And immediately my chemistry was so much better with this instrument because I could hug it. I could carry it with me to school. I can show it off to my friends. And it just felt to me like a much more intimate way of creating sound. And then, of course, the Bach suites. That was for this instrument. So it was so exciting, those first few days learning to play the cello.
Well, it obviously rubbed off. I mean, I think if my maths are correct, you were an extremely young winner of the 5th Rostropovich International Cello Competition. Were you 12?
I was 11. It was
You were
before
11.
my,
Okay. Well,
it
my
was
maths.
before my 12th
Right.
birthday.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. Sorry, I'm just gonna backtrack a little
Yeah.
bit
Please
because
do. Yeah.
I
Yeah.
started getting my first cello lessons, and I had a very, very strict teacher. Like
Right.
she literally had a ruler in her hand, and if I held the bow somewhat in a wrong manner, she would.
Yeah.
Ouch! There goes my. So she was very strict, but to a certain extent, it was very good because you have to have good posture, good form. I mean, you know this. You're a violinist yourself. It's so important to have the right positions. But on the other hand, when she moved away, far away, I was so happy to be liberated. I stopped getting lessons for about 6 months. And then my mom found this wonderful conservatory student who was basically playing with me. It wasn't learning, and it was playing. And it became fun again. I became really serious about it when to this day, it's so vivid, when I, for the first time, saw Jacqueline Dupre playing the Elgar Cello Concerto.
Yeah.
That was life-changing experience because I think I experienced for the first time what an intimate and direct and powerful experience a performance is. What just the level of communication. I mean, what she was giving to me, what she was saying to me was just, I never experienced anything like that. And that was really the beginning of me playing the cello very, very seriously. Yeah. So of course you want to play for the great cellists that I always saw on the album covers, and Slava was one of them, except he was too busy, and he was extremely famous, of course. I mean, the greatest cellist alive, and enormously busy, and it was impossible to get through to any agents or managers or representatives. Is the great maestro, and you're like, how old are you? 9, 10? So then we found this information about his competition. He used to have an international cello competition every 4 years in Paris. And he later told me that he had completely forgotten about setting the underage limit. It was for anybody 33 years old and younger, which covered me definitely, because I was 11 at the time. So I applied, and somehow they thought it was a typo that I was 11. They thought I was 21. So I passed the application, went there, played in the first round. Slava later told me he almost had a heart attack because he thought the cello was walking up by itself. Because I was hiding behind the cello. I went there to really meet him and play for him. And winning the competition was really a bonus. It changed my life, absolutely. But I went to really play for him. And it was great to meet him, and he became one of my most important mentors. Although, let me just mention very quickly, Misha Maisky is my cello daddy. Misha opened my eyes to music. I'm just so fortunate to have these great influences when I was so young.
I'm going to go back very briefly to the Elgar and to Jacqueline Dupre. I wonder whether us musicians there are certain pieces that are inextricably linked to one person. The Elgar is inextricably linked to Jacqueline Dupre.
It's her piece.
It's her piece. And every cellist afterwards has to make a decision about how she plays it compared to what's written on the page. Same as conductors is that, I can't imagine there's a professional conductor alive who has not watched Carlos Kleiber videos, right? And his name comes up on this podcast. It comes up and you get to conduct Beethoven's 7. For instance, I'm doing it, conducting right at the moment with the Corinthian Chamber Orchestra in London, the concerts at the end of the week. There are certain moments you get to a corner and think, oh God, you've just done exactly what Kleiber did in that video. It again, it's linked. The Beethoven 4, Beethoven 7, Rosenkavalier, all of those things that we've all watched. Do you think it's a good thing or a bad thing? I mean, I'm just throwing it out there. I don't know. I mean, especially the Elgar with Jacqueline Dupre, you have to make a decision at some point, don't you? I suppose. I can't think of a violin equivalent.
It's a bad thing at all. I don't think it's a bad thing at all. I think it's a good thing in that if you just take a step back, for me, I mean, when I was a cellist and playing Elgar, or like you said, if you're conducting Beethoven 4, 7, or Beethoven 5, even there's stuff on the internet, fantastic stuff. Brahms 2, Brahms 4, Mozart, Linz. Coriolan Overture.
Yeah. And by the way,
doesn't
that work? By the way, have you ever tried it?
Oh yes, absolutely,
Yeah.
of course. And if I just take a step back and think, wow, to get to that level of intimacy, to be so identifying and so believing in the music, and to have such deep convictions that whoever watches it. Jackie's been dead how many years, and I was born in South Korea, so far away from England, and completely different generation, and it touches me so. I think that's a great source of inspiration, and it gives me so much courage that just dig into the music.
Yes,
just dig in, and try to find for myself what the composer is trying to tell me. I think for me, it's a great source of encouragement and inspiration to have these strong associations, because it shows me what's possible.
Yeah.
And of course, me too, when I do Beethoven 7.
Yes.
And I just think, Carlos Kleiber. I think I might try what he did, because the results he got.
Exactly.
Some of it is just so musical, because I don't think it's choreography. Some people say it's beautifully choreographed, but as a conductor, I know we don't choreograph anything, because we're responding to what the orchestra needs in the moment.
Absolutely.
And what we want in our vision. We want to marry the two, right? The reality and what's in our hearts, and try to make something become. So we're responding to what we're hearing, who's in front of us at the moment, and maybe it works to pull a Kleiber. And I love him so much. Oh my God.
But, just for the listener who maybe doesn't know this, but he wrote a letter to I think his name's Charles Barber. He's a professor of conducting in America. I've actually asked him to come on the podcast, and he said no.
That's
just
awesome.
just read the book. Yeah, he said just read the book. You don't need to come on. Yeah. But Kleiber wrote this letter basically saying that he'd always struggled with the start of Coriolan. And then he went to see Duke Ellington conduct a concert with his band. And Ellington walked out, gave a cursory bow to the audience, and then immediately just turned around and gave this slamming downbeat, and off they went. And he said it was the most electrifying start. So he said he went back and tried it with Coriolan, and it works. It absolutely works. And I've done it with Egmont as well, and it does work.
Yes,
because by trying to prepare those big monolithic columns of unison C or unison F, by in any other way, the sound doesn't either start right, or you get the depth when it doesn't. But you just turn around and go whack, and you just
have to jump in.
Yeah, exactly.
Exactly. You just jump in. Yeah.
We got very Kleiber geeky there, which is good. Let's see if he comes up later. You mentioned Misha Maisky, but also Slava is such a big name because he was a conductor as well.
Absolutely.
When did conducting really start for you, becoming a thing that you were interested in? I mean, I'm interested. Was it anything to do with learning with Slava? Or as it was, you got older and you were at Juilliard, and also I read you studied at Harvard at the same time, studied philosophy. But I'm really interested to know when conducting first reared its head. I won't say ugly head, but reared its head.
Its beautiful head.
Yes.
I think it was around the time that I turned 16, 15, 16. The cello repertoire is very small. And I was so fortunate to start my career as a cellist, so young at the age of 11, 12. But even then I found myself playing the same pieces over and over and over and over again.
Sure, yeah.
And because the repertoire is so limited and we don't have the luxury that the violinists or the pianists have, I found myself feeling a little bit like looking down the microscope every single day. I was just analyzing the same notes over and over again. And I thought, but I want to discover galaxies. I want to have a look at the sun and the moon and the stars. I want to look at the telescope. And for me, the classical music's wonderful firmament, the stars are really the symphonic music. So yes, I had heard Beethoven symphonies, in my childhood growing up. Of course, Brahms and Tchaikovsky, wonderful, but I should really study the scores because that's the music. Of course, you have many, many great recordings, but the first source is always what the composer wrote on the paper for me. So I got myself Beethoven symphonies, Mahler symphonies, and Bruckner symphonies. Those three I was absolutely just obsessed with in my late teenage years. Thanks to another one of my mentors, who I would like to mention just briefly here, is Giuseppe Sinopoli. I was very lucky to meet him. My first concert with him was when I was 12 years old. And until his sudden death, I think we played over 30 concerts together.
Oh, wow.
And the other day I was just looking through some of the old stuff. And in the first half, this is the first time I met Gustav Mahler. First half, I played Haydn Cello Concerto in Dresden. This is when I was 13. Second half, he did Das Lied von der Erde. And even today, I still remember so well the second half. I was sitting in the royal balcony in that gorgeous, gorgeous theater. This ewig in my head. It was just so beautiful. And here was this great maestro whom I loved dearly, is the warmest mentor ever. And this music and this beautiful, alto, just singing on. And I cannot forget it. And that's where I really fell in love with Mahler. So I started studying these scores. And then, you say to yourself, I've got to conduct this. Let's find a conducting teacher. So that led to my first conducting lesson with James DePriest, whom I had played with, I knew. But at the time, he was the chair of the conducting department at Juilliard. So it was very easy to write, "Dear Meister DePriest, I'd like to conduct." And he said, "Okay, come. You're not the first one. What would you like to conduct?" And I said, "Beethoven 7. And he said, "Why is it that everybody wants to start with Beethoven 7? I don't know. It's great music."
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. Well, you'll know, having listened to episodes, that I always ask with a teacher whose name I'm pretty sure we've not discussed James DePriest on the podcast, about as being a teacher. What sort of style was he? Was he a stick-based guy? Was he a score-based guy? Or was he the whole overall package? Well, how did he focus in the lessons?
I think with me, he focused a lot on the whole thing, I would like to say, but even more specifically on how the baton was conveying the weight of the sound.
Yes.
How clear it was. And he was all about economy. And, if you're conducting for the first time, that's the farthest thing, or at least it was the farthest thing from my economy. I love this music. But so, I mean, like, I brought the Coriolan to him together with Beethoven 7th. So one of the first works that we worked on together. And this downbeat of Coriolan and the weight.
Yes.
You've got to show the weight. It's just, how heavy is it?
Yeah.
And we talked about the weight of Beethoven and the weight of Mahler. But then again, you've got to conduct Mahler in order to find out for yourself. I find that, here in Trondheim, we've been going through Mahler symphonies since I started my tenure here in 17. And apart from the 3rd and the 8th, we've done everything together.
Yeah.
All the Mahler symphonies. Or we will have.
Yes.
When we get to Das Lied von der Erde next season. The 3rd symphony, Mahler 3, we're doing next season. So then it becomes quite clear to me now, having done almost all of Mahler, what James DePriest, Meister DePriest, was saying about the weight of the baton in Beethoven and in Stravinsky. And I think that also has to do with the relationship you have with the orchestra. If it's your own orchestra, like, Mike, and you have this relationship, not just through 1 or 2 programs, but throughout the whole literature, then this becomes something that you can really work on with the orchestra. If you're visiting for the first time, or you don't know each other that well, and you find that they're not quite responding the way you expect to, then this becomes a different question of weight, because what they need, you and I will know within the first 10 minutes is something completely we didn't expect.
Yeah.
And we need to adapt to get the results we want. So that was a very interesting discussion. I still remember to this day is the weight of the baton, the clarity, the economy of gestures. And he also had me sometimes conduct without the baton, and he loved it. He thought, is it because you're an instrumentalist that your hands are so expressive? And like you feel that somehow
Absolutely.
your hands are. I feel like compared to my dad, who never played a musical instrument, I always say this to tease my dad, but dad, that's because you didn't play an instrument. We have these connections with our fingers, when you're well warmed up and you're in good shape. That's one feeling. When you've not been practicing for a week, you feel totally like I felt like concrete in my hands if I hadn't practiced every day. So maybe it's that connection. But that was also very interesting. He was such a kind man. Yeah, he was really a wonderful, wonderful teacher. Yes.
I mean, what the listener can't see is whenever you said the word wait, and you used it about 12 times in that last passage of chatting, but you were doing a sort of downward gesture. And I've met you, and there's a big height difference between the two of us. Put it that way. But what came across on the picture was there. What you were doing was a weighty, heavy, but it was a small gesture, and it's learning to convey that without going to, as you said, when we first start conducting, this phrase I use, and I still conduct like this now when I get carried away, is I look like a speared octopus. I've been sort of speared to the ground, and there's
wonderful.
8 legs
I'm
going.
going to quote you.
Yeah, that's right. But that's what it feels like sometimes. There's all of these uncontrolled limbs going in different directions. But you need to learn to be able to bottle it and come up with something that is heavy.
Absolutely.
And also what you say is so right. And this has come up on the podcast before. When you go and guest somewhere, you put that downbeat down and you have no idea when it's going to come back, how it's going to come back.
But then, what is going to come back.
And what's going to come back. But then the second time, so, as you've said, I've been to your lovely orchestra now, I think 3 times in total. When I came back for the second time, when you saw me conduct the concert, already I knew what was going to come back and how it was going to come back. And from there, you then go on again, and that's the wonderful thing about forming relationships. But to be able to squeeze heaviness into a small gesture is a real art and a real trick. And it's something that we all need to learn to do. And I also have a theory about us. I think, I'm assuming, yes, you do. I've seen videos of you conduct right-handed. I think as string players who've been used to using the wrist and the fingers with the bow, I think when we come to hold a baton in our hand, we have an extra sort of. I remember early on a pianist saying to me, "Oh, it's so obvious you're a professional string player. How fluid your beat is, how your fingers move." And when I put the baton down for a slow movement, I think it helps that my hands can do things that string players do. I think it helps.
Yeah, I agree totally, because you have this connection. Yeah, with your hand, with the tips of your fingers, with your vibrato and all of it. And I think it's so important, not just because I'm a string player, but so important for conductors to have this connection with a string instrument. I think it's invaluable. Yes. Now, and just to go back to this, what you were saying about the weight in the small gesture. Sorry, but the late Karajan recordings, when he was, that to me is absolute masterpiece of such small gestures. What he was doing.
Yeah, Bruckner with the wet heft and weight. Yeah, exactly.
Yes, and barely doing anything, and it's wonderful. Yes.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to stick to string playing because I'm going to ask you a question I don't know the answer to. I honestly don't. I stopped playing as a professional in July 2014 and have barely touched a violin since. On a handful of occasions. I don't know when you decided to pull back from being a cello soloist, whether you still do make appearances as a cello soloist. Where is the cello now in your life? How does it figure? What's happening with the cello?
Oh, my cello, who? It's always a who. It's a he. Who I love dearly. It's at home. Yeah. And it has a nickname, Sleeping Beauty or Sleeping Bow. Yeah. I think I stopped giving public concerts around the same time you did, actually. I think it was 2013 or 2014. There were a couple of dates. I think one was in San Carlo, Napoli, and the other one was in Singapore, where I did play directing. So first half Haydn play directing, second half something like Prokofiev 5. And then I stopped. Not only because it's difficult to keep both or be a top level string player and be a serious conductor, not only because it's difficult to travel with a cello, just for the sake of practicing. You don't drag your precious cello and buy an extra ticket on the plane and leave it in the hotel room all by itself all day while you're rehearsing the orchestra. It's just not secure. Or I feel like it's not secure. So, but I really wanted to give myself a fair chance of becoming a serious conductor. And as you know, Mike, this is more than a full-time job, or it is for me, because there's just so many notes to learn, and learning the so many notes really is only the beginning. I feel like, how do you get to a not only well thought out, but well lived interpretation of Beethoven and Brahms? I mean, the great maestro Karajan used to do Brahms Beethoven cycles every year in Berlin. I mean, that amount of experience versus the amount of experience one can get nowadays as a young conductor, conducting, doing Beethoven cycles. Okay, so how many Beethoven cycles can you work into the first 10 years of your career as a serious conductor? So I just felt like it deserved, and I wanted to devote all of my time to this symphonic repertoire. So I walked away of my own volition from the solo career. Yeah.
Let's talk about time, and it's sort of the next question is sort of linked between the time spent away from actually rehearsing and performing and not yet score study. Well, we're not there yet, but it's to do with the other roles that we have, especially in the two jobs that you had or you have and had. You spent a short time with the Qatar Philharmonic Orchestra as music director, and you've been principal guest. And then now, since 1718, you've been the chief conductor of the Trondheim Symphony Orchestra. Now, in my mind, Trondheim is an established orchestra. It's been around a long time. There's a concert hall right in the middle of the city. They sort of know their role in cultural life of Norway, and cultural life of Trondheim, whatever else. Whereas Qatar, I would imagine that was a pretty newish orchestra. They were trying to forge bonds with audiences that weren't used to Western classical music. How was your role away from the actual music making, coming up with programs, coming up with ideas, touring, speaking to the managements about your role? I would imagine it was much different between Qatar and Trondheim.
Yes. In Qatar, my season was 15 weeks. Per season in Qatar. Right. And here now in Trondheim, I'm doing 8 weeks plus touring or plus opera.
Yes.
And in Qatar, my interaction was mostly with the managing director of the orchestra, with whom I would talk about everything. So it was just pretty much one-on-one relationship. Whereas here, as you well know, there's Geir for production, Birgit for programming, and all the logistics with Charlotte, and then Tove does the marketing. So I find that here the dialogue is more horizontal and more lateral, and everybody has a well-defined, it's a well-oiled machine. And sometimes I'm still amazed, this is not my first season by far, but I'm still amazed that it's run so smoothly, because if you look at some of the American orchestras, they have many more people on their staff. And we're pretty much one person responsible for each area for the orchestra to do what it does, and it works very well. So it's very different away from the podium and away from the stage. But I see my main role as being on stage. I mean, all of the things that goes on behind the stage is just preparation to get the orchestra on stage and to create this fantastic artistic experience for our audiences. So in a way, it's very different, but in a way, it's very same for me.
But I mean, it needs to be said that, if things are running very, very smoothly off the stage, it means you can concentrate on being on stage. All of those people that I've just spoken, you've just mentioned there in Trondheim, I know, and hello if you're listening, dear Birgit and Charlotte and Geir and all these people, But the point is, you can have a relationship with all of those. You can speak to them individually. That it means that things are done very quickly. Things are done, and it means you can concentrate on doing your job as well as you can. You're not worried. Well, if I've said that to that one person, is that being filtered down beneath them?
Right.
Do you know what I mean?
Right.
If you're only speaking to one person, then you've got to totally trust that person, I suppose. I mean,
absolutely.
I've not been in that position. Whereas in Trondheim, everybody, is easy to talk to. I mean, the best example I can give is that last time I was there, that Norway changed the regulations to do with COVID, which meant that we lost our last 3 concerts.
I heard about that.
And my wife was there, and she was flying home that day on the Tuesday, and I was going to take her to the airport. But within an hour and a half, I'd got a ticket on the same flights as her, and I could go home with her because my concerts had been cancelled. It was done so quickly, so in such a friendly way. And it means music making is just so much easier because you're not fretting about anything else. You can just get out there and rehearse.
Exactly. Your life is easier this way, and I feel also that decisions are made faster.
Yeah,
and they can be more artistically oriented.
Yes.
If I go to Geir, or if I go to Birgit, or for example, if I go to production or programming or artistic planning, and say, because of this, because of Mahler, or because of Beethoven, because of the program we're doing, this is what needs to happen. And if they understand, we just say, okay, let's do it like that. That's it. End of discussion. It happens.
Yeah.
It happens. Like you said, there is no waste of time. There is no waste of procedure. And we can just really focus on the music. And for this, I am so grateful. And I feel very, very fortunate that this is the support system we have for TSO, for our musicians, for our orchestra, and that we can really focus on just giving our all at the rehearsals and then some more at the concert.
Absolutely. The question that every single conductor has been asked, it's the 11th question, which is about score preparation. When you come to learn a new score, how do you go about it? What's your plan? Big to small? Do you use a keyboard ever? And are you a scribbler? For the geeks amongst us, are you a red, blue, black highlighter pens, or do you not write anything in at all?
How do you not write anything? I don't know about you, Mike, but I love... we did a program of Mozart 40 and Dvorak 9 2 weeks ago, and our stage manager, Corey, he looked at my Mozart and said, not so many drawings this time, eh? I love to draw. I love color pencils. I use artist grade pencils. For the graphite, I use 3B, 4B is my favorite. I love expensive pencils because the feeling, you get such nice feeling when you write into the score. Because I love the feeling so much, I write more in my score.
Yes.
I love to highlight. Recently, I've been getting into highlighting. So green, purple, orange, yellow, whatever. It's my score. I'll do whatever I want to it.
Exactly.
The whole point is, if it helps me get all the goodies into my head, I'll do whatever it's necessary to help myself absorb the music. When I get a new score, completely new, so we're not talking about like getting a new pocket score of Brahms that we've done many times, but just the contemporary music. I still have a tendency of going by the bass line.
Right. Yeah.
I try to get the big structures organized. If I see any pattern, I want to see how the composer is using or developing or repeating the patterns, and then I try to get a very clear idea of paragraphs, sentences, periods, commas, question marks, and everything else that he's throwing in between.
Yeah.
So what, for me, the most helpful thing I can do for myself early on is to get the structure of the piece sorted out. And then the structure, of course, comes from harmonic progression, from motivic development, but all of this will, and then I go about, sorting out instrumentation or, other variations of main themes or quirks, why is he using a triangle this time and not the symbols like the past 2 times, or blah, blah, blah. But if I have a very clear idea of the structure, I find that the piece just becomes mine so much faster. Yeah. So that's what I tend to do.
I like your use of language about, the story, then paragraphs, then sentences, then because I've often said, I used to say it when I taught the violin.
Yes.
But it's no different now when I teach conducting. If you're looking at a phrase of music, where would the author put the word love or death? I.e.,
Right.
where is the top of the phrase? Where
Yes, exactly.
And can you stop obsessing about the words and, of, it's, the? Can we
Thank
head
you.
towards
Yes.
love or death and then away from it or whatever?
Yes.
It is.
Yes,
And
exactly.
I think that's a really simple way of getting it across to a students. But it's basically what we're doing.
Orchestra,
Yeah.
To everybody, because we were rehearsing. There was this passage in the last movement of Mozart 40, and the cadence was it was unresolved open cadence, and we kept making 2-bar diminuendos at the end of the very dum 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 dum, and I didn't like that. So I said, "Yeah, but did you have lunch, or did you have lunch, or right, right?" Like I had lunch. I had lunch. It has different connotations. And
Absolutely.
I really think it's the same thing in music. And that's just the trick, and I never had to ask for that phrase again, because so sometimes I think using such examples and such words just make things so much more easier to communicate.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, I shall never forget, it will be still part of Andres Nelson's rehearsal ways. But if a metaphor didn't strike home, then he would say, technically, I would like this. And then he'd just talk about a diminuendo or a phrase, I'd like it to go from piano to pianissimo. But more often than not, the metaphor worked. But he always had a second chance, because he said, well, you could see it, you could see him think, well, the metaphor didn't work. Right. Technically, I'd like this. Which is the boring way of saying that, in nuts and bolts. But, I think we need many ways to get across our point. And if you know that a use of language works with that orchestra, great. Or a use of metaphor works with that orchestra, great. Some orchestras, I use a certain phrase all the time and it works, and then I've used it in another orchestra and it never works. And you think, okay, right.
That's so true.
Yeah, I need another way.
True.
Yeah,
because I love to talk about, this is something that I really learned from Carlos Kleiber. But if you talk about the mood, and it's just the colors that you can get, like waking up so early in the morning, you can hear the birds chirping, and you're in a strawberry field, and you smell the fresh strawberries, and already you have some sound. And for example, my orchestra here, Trondheim, as you know, they love this kind of things. And some orchestras, like you pointed out, why can't you just say pianissimo?
Yeah.
Everybody's different. So it's really interesting what musicians react to.
I've had exactly the same thing. I've used a metaphor and somebody's just shouted out across the orchestra, so you want it louder then? You think, oh, well, that's slammed the metaphor away. Yeah, exactly.
Exactly. I had that experience too. It's like, I was like, oh, it's like, where's my $10? Pay me back. The third trombone is like, you want it louder? Yeah.
Oh, well, orchestras and the chemistry between a conductor and we could get podcast after podcast about that.
Exactly.
Yeah. Are you fascinated by conductors and conducting? And would you like to learn a lot more about what we do and how we do it? Well, you can find out all sorts of secrets, tips, opinions, and much more on my Patreon page. You can hear interviews with musicians, composers, soloists and managers, and hear their thoughts on conducting and conductors. You can read my diaries when I go on guest conducting trips, such as Trondheim. You can take part in group meetings with other like-minded conducting fans. You can read my articles on conducting and conductors, and you can even have conducting lessons from myself. All of this is available at patreon.com/a mic on the podium, and from just £5 a month, which is less than a pint of beer in most cities, you can gain access to this ever-growing resource on conductors and conducting. Details and links to the page are in the show notes attached to this episode. Now, the all-important 10 questions with my guest, Han-na Chang. Han-na, as somebody who's listened to a few episodes, you will know what's coming now. It is the all-important and unavoidable 10 questions. And so I will start with, what sound or noise do you love, and what sound or noise do you hate?
I love the sound of nature, any sound, but especially summer evenings. I love that. I love rain. I love hearing rainfall. I really love it. The sound that I hate the most, and I can confidently say I hate, is the secondhand ticking on a clock. That bothers me so much. So whenever I'm studying, I'm either taking batteries out of clocks or even my watches. I love watches, but do you know how loud they are?
Yes.
They're so every time I go shopping for watches, I'm listening to the secondhand because those really get to me. And if you're probably like me too, but you don't want to 60 BPM all the time.
No. Well, as a watch collector, I think most of my watches are automatics that go at sort of and so they're almost silent. You have to put them right by your ear. But yeah, I've got some older ones that when I've worn them and I've put them on the side, you can hear them go tick tick. You think, you just don't want 60 or 120 or 180, or you just don't want it in your life. No, it's true.
I have one more thing that I hate. I love my scores, but the ones that are printed on glossy paper, like some of the pocket Sikorsky, and I love Sikorsky, but the glossy paper, I really don't like that. You get a glare from reading those. Please, nice matte paper.
We're just going to start listing things we hate rather than sounds we hate. But yeah, that's fine. That's absolutely fine.
Oh yes, sounds important.
No matter. If you had 24 hours free, what would you spend it doing?
I would spend it definitely with my parents, and we'll fly over to Seoul, South Korea to spend the day with my grandma, who's 94 years old now.
Wow.
She's a sweetheart. And every minute with her is so precious now. I can't wait to make the trip back this summer to see her. And that's what I do.
Yeah. I've been to Seoul once, many, many, many years ago. There's a poster on my wall, but there's no date on it, so I can't tell you when it was. The most enthusiastic, almost possibly the youngest sort of demographic of audience. I was there doing 3 concerts with KBS Symphony Orchestra and Ian Bostridge, the tenor, and we did lots of Handel arias and then Dvorak's New World Symphony, and really enjoyed my time over there. Really, really liked it. But I thought the audience were just wonderful, absolutely wonderful.
Yeah. And they love music, and they have thirst and hunger for it. Yeah,
yes, absolutely. They do. Yeah. Now, question number 4. I wonder whether Karajan or Kleiber or anybody else starting with K might appear. Can you name some favorite conductors, or just one conductor of yesteryear?
I can't name one. I'm sorry, Mike.
That's fine.
Yes, I do love Karajan. I do love Carlos Kleiber, Leonard Bernstein, Furt Bangler, Guido Cantelli. Oh, I love Guido Cantelli so much. I'll stop right there.
Okay, cool. Cantelli for the opera, or just everything?
For the opera? No, just whatever I can get my hands on. Yeah. Whatever he did, that's now available. And in fact, do we have a recording of his opera?
I was just thinking off the top of my head whether I've absolutely shot myself in the foot and thought whether he did any opera or not.
Yeah, I'm wondering that too, because I'm regularly Googling and Amazoning and Apple Musicing, and what's out there seems to be, although once in a while there's some rarities coming out. And
I possibly mentioned opera because I realized that we didn't really talk about that with Trondheim, in the fact that we hear of the Trondheim Symphony Orchestra, but each year you do a stage opera.
Yes.
And you've got one coming up very soon. It's one of the perks of that job, I would say, is the fact that you can do the opera should you choose to.
Exactly. It's wonderful. It's wonderful. We do a full stage production, and then we do a smaller production in the autumn. So technically 2, but you're right to say 1 full really staged. We're doing Tosca this year, and I'm just over the moon to do it. I love this opera so much. You can tell I love many things, but this opera I really love so much. They all end up dead. I mean, the drama and the power and just the tragedy of it. And Oh, well,
I'm very jealous. That sounds wonderful. Well,
yes.
You listed very quickly some names of conductors of yesteryear. I wonder whether you'll be just as quick with your favorite current conductors.
Although there is one that's I'm just absolutely loving everything he does, is Kirill Petrenko.
Yes.
Isn't it amazing what he's doing?
Yeah.
I mean, every note from him is just dripping with sincerity and imagination.
Yeah.
I think I'm just, every time something new pops up in digital concert, I'm like, because yeah, it's really the imagination and the sound itself is, I find, so amazing. Yeah.
I agree.
Yeah.
I'm exactly the same. Whenever something pops up on the digital concert hall, I will quickly find 2 hours to sit down and watch it. And
yes, absolutely. And the repertoire he chooses is really intriguing and really interesting, like fully interesting, no?
It is, but he's also not frightened to do the Berlin Phil classics either, to put his stamp on those.
Exactly.
When they came across and did the proms before the pandemic came, they came and did Strauss 10 poems and Beethoven 7. I mean, it couldn't be more Berlin Phil if you tried.
More Berlin Phil. Yeah, exactly.
But he as you said, he is doing some really different repertoire with them. And he seems to do everything wonderfully, and technically a joy to watch as well. I don't never sit there with my very harsh teaching hat on, going, "Oh, what did you do that for?" No, never. I sit there and think, "Oh, this is wonderful." So, brilliant choice.
Yeah, and the joy that comes across, and you can actually see when the music is painful. You can see how much he's in pain.
Yeah,
I love that, the sincerity, and there's just no hiding behind anything. Such a humble musician, really a humble approach, really trying to serve the composer. And that really moves me so much.
Nothing seems to be for the camera's benefit at all. It's all for the player's benefit. And he's in the moment and doing it. And,
exactly.
My sort of conducting.
Yeah.
Really.
Absolutely. Mine too. Yep.
What is the hardest work you've ever conducted?
Yes, that's a very difficult question, Mike. And
it is, yeah.
It is. I think I find everything tremendously difficult, and also because your job, my job, our job is to make it easy for the musicians.
Yes.
So I think it's difficult to find the solutions, but once we find them, it should no longer feel difficult. It should only feel natural and clear. So everything I've done and nothing I've done, everything I've done, and hopefully I have solutions for the musicians by the time I meet them at the first rehearsal.
Yeah. Well, but you also said something early on which I utterly and totally agree with. But I'm sure some conductors, do think about their moves before they conduct and stick rigidly to them. But earlier on, you said, you should never conduct it the same way twice, because you're reacting to what comes at you from the orchestra every time you conduct.
Yes.
Which means that there are moments in pieces which technically you probably think are absolutely, it's like riding a horse, it's dead easy, or riding a bike. But then all of a sudden you have to do something to try and right a wrong, or to try and stop the wheels of the car slipping, because you can hear it about to happen. And that's when things become difficult, because you've got to find that gesture in a nanosecond, there and then. You can't try 4 or 5 gestures, because by the time you've done that, the car has skidded.
It's gone. It's gone. Yeah. I have that experience also, because I used to have a festival in South Korea for 6 summers. It was called the Absolute Classic. And it was every month, the whole month of August, we audition a new orchestra every year from musicians for the age of 22 until 32.
Yeah.
And they practically had just graduated from conservatory or came back from abroad, came back to South Korea after studying in Germany or France or wherever, America, and they had no orchestra experience, and they had yet to find permanent jobs. So we did this for 6 summers, and we did all Tchaikovsky, Brahms, Strauss, Mahler, Berlioz, Fantastique, Sacre du Printemps. And it was really, really hard work for them and for me, because you're just basically learning the repertoire from scratch.
Yeah.
So like you described, many times there'd be moments when things were about to fall apart. And even with experienced orchestras, in such passages you mentioned. And then I would try so hard to glue it back together. And then I saw this documentary. They were interviewing members of the Berlin about Claudio Abbado. Oh, Abbado! How could I forget him? Abbado, to your earlier question.
Oh, to earlier question, yes, yeah.
And they would say, well, if something wasn't together, he'd just stop conducting, and the musicians would have to listen to each other. And there were maybe, as you well know, there are many instances in Korean recordings as well. You would think they're so polished and edited, but actually there are many passages when things are about to fall apart, and then miraculously they all come together again. And
Yeah.
I think that kind of shows in the experience of the conductor that sometimes the most effective thing one can do is just to force them to listen to each other.
Yes.
You can force them to watch your beat, but if they're actually forced to take a more proactive activity, be proactive about playing together, I think sometimes it's more effective, and then trying to really, really do that more is that they take the lead, because it has to come from them. Yeah.
Well, I've done this, with amateur orchestras, I've done it with youth orchestras, and I know I've done it with professional orchestras as well. When things start to wobble, I'll stop conducting and I'll point at the person in the orchestra I think is the conductor. It could be a snare drum player, it could be the timpanist, it could be the horn section, it could be whatever.
Right.
Stop watching what you think to be my beat and start listening to the person who's actually giving the rhythm. And normally things glue quickly. I had a rehearsal yesterday with my amateur orchestra in London. I just stopped and pointed at the timpanist, and all of a sudden within half a bar it was together. But rather than trying desperately with, by being speared to the ground as an octopus again with our legs flaming and everything, just lie still and just point to the person that they should be listening to, and it'll fix
absolutely
itself.
Right. Yes.
But,
absolutely.
I think you're right. And I think you're the first person not to give a specific piece, but to say that conducting everything that we conduct is difficult. And even if we've sorted out our gestures, there are times when you can't use those gestures because you have to be fixing something in the orchestra. You're constantly living on a knife edge of how to react and how to respond. And I think that's a perfectly valid and good answer. So,
and my orchestra so well, but we're now, with me and my orchestra, we're at a time where we're starting to have the luxury of repeating repertoire whilst doing still new things together. So when we come back to Brahms, for example, and we try to do it regularly, and I've programmed a Beethoven cycle next season. So we have played some Beethoven symphonies together, but then we really try to find the Brahms sound, and this is so difficult because unless you've been doing it every season, regularly, this is something that we have to really think about and really find. And this for me sometimes is as difficult or even more difficult than actually the active conducting, and the technical aspect is to find a palette.
Yes.
And that's a really real joy to be able to work on these things now. Here.
Question 7, and as we know, you travel abroad a lot, so let's find out your answer. When traveling abroad to conduct, what item could you not leave home without?
My pillow.
You're a pillow person.
I travel with my pillow, yes. Shoulders, neck. I'm just a happier person if I sleep on my pillow. So.
Yeah.
Everywhere I go, it takes up like half of my suitcase. I don't care. I'll just bring another suitcase.
Yeah. Well, I have to say, I know that we use the same hotel in Trondheim. The first night I was there at Christmas doing the snowman, I had the worst night's sleep because I'd forgotten my pillow regime in that hotel. By the second night, I realized I needed 2 of one specific shape and 1 of another specific shape, and I was then fine. Right. But if you get it wrong, I mean, sleep is so important, isn't it? So, you're not the last or first or last to say a pillow. And,
that's good.
I think it's very important.
Yeah.
Number 8. What is the one thing you would change about being a conductor?
Nothing.
Oops!
Did I just make a mistake?
No,
I
not at all.
Can't think of anything I would change. I don't know.
Yeah.
What were some of the crazy answers you had in the past?
I some people have talked about dress, concert dress. Some people have talked about the relationship between conductors and players, that why does it have to be so standoffish at times? Some people have talked about management, whether you need management or what you should expect from your management. There've been all sorts of different answers. I've had a couple of people who said no, they really love it, and that's the reason why they started it, and it's turned out to be exactly what they wanted.
I mean, it's so much. It's so difficult. I never imagined when I started as a conductor, coming from a cellist, I never imagined it was this difficult a job. This much, that it would just totally engulf my life to the extent that I don't have the luxury of thinking about anything else.
No.
I mean, just from purely musical perspective, what we're supposed to do on stage as conductors, just from purely musical perspective, and but it's great music.
Yeah,
so I think it's worth it. And, and everything else, of course, but no, I'm fine. I'm fine.
I mean, I think what's interesting is in your particular case, I mean, I'm thinking now as an ex-orchestral musician, the thing that frightened me swapping over was I didn't really know what went on backstage, i.e. with chief executives, with managers, with agents, with all of that sort of stuff. Right. That part of our world had passed me by. I was an orchestra player. So all of that was new and fresh to me. But you've been experiencing all of that since the age of 12. So none of that was a shock to you at all.
So maybe, exactly.
So that you'd grown up with. Whereas for me, that was the weird and wonderful new world I had to get used to.
Sure. Yes.
Where I suppose if the boot was on the other foot, and you came and sat in the cello section for 6 months, you'd realise that the world was a different world. But
exactly, it's a different world.
Absolutely. Well, seeing as you've had two professions, i.e., solo cellist and conductor, I wonder what your choice, a third choice would be. What profession other than your own would you like to attempt?
Heart surgeon. It was always a fantasy of mine, childhood dream. I always thought I was going to be a heart surgeon.
Yeah.
I don't know why.
and what were your sciences like growing up?
Oh, horrible.
Okay, fair enough. Yeah.
Horrible. I think I love the tension.
Yes.
I think I love nervous is not the right word for it. Maybe you have a better word, but the state where you're so focused that you're actually comfortable, that everything is just has to be, and then you actually feel free. Maybe as an instrumentalist, if you're so well prepared, you feel so good and so free and just so happy, and this I really like that. I like that kind of
Well, to use a sporting term, which I hate, but actually I've been in that place twice as a cricketer, in the zone. To be in the zone. Yes. Yeah. Where you're so concentrated on the situation that you're in that actually you become free. I've had it twice as a batsman in my entire life.
Wonderful.
But to be in that place, it is, and you're always searching to get back there.
Right.
And I think we're like that as conductors. We're like that as musicians, as soloists. When you're in that place where nothing else can affect you, you're incredibly well prepared, and it's all going, how you see it, and then. And I think also about being a heart surgeon is that whilst you personally, in your own mind, have to be in that place, you can only be a successful heart surgeon if you're surrounded by other doctors, nurses who are doing their jobs in exactly the same way.
Yes.
So, it's not a surprising choice at all. So there we go.
No? Okay, that's good. I'm not a weirdo.
No, you're not a weirdo. No, definitely not. And the final question. If the world were to end tonight, what would be your choice of final meal and drink?
Actually, if really the world were to end tonight, I think I'd be too frightened to eat anything.
Well, let's imagine you. Well,
since I'm in Trondheim now, I definitely have this Norwegian apple must. The Norwegian apple cider, although it's not really cider, it's the most decadent and luxurious apple juice, and not sweet, a little bit tart. It's wonderful. Next time you're here, we'll treat you to it.
Yes,
I'll have the apple must. Yes, and Norwegian codfish, I guess, which is so excellent here. A nice humble Norwegian meal. I probably, to be serious, I think I'll have the Holy Communion as well.
To be with the same as Manfred Hodding. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, I mean, talking of codfish, as you were, you couldn't be in a better place. I mean, really, you couldn't. The food there is really, really good. You get local fresh fish there. It's wonderful.
The fish is really excellent. Yeah.
Yeah. As it's been wonderful, it's been for the last hour or so, Hannah. I knew it would be after we met backstage in Trondheim. We talked about you coming on the podcast. I knew it would be a wonderful hour. And so thank you. And I hope very soon that we meet somewhere again and carry on chatting. And maybe if it's in Trondheim, we can have some of that apple cider. That sounds lovely.
Yes, we'll do that together. Thanks so much, Mike, for having me. This was so much fun. And what a pleasure to chat with another conductor.
It is,
it's
isn't
just
it?
so easy to talk to you. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. A Mic on the Podium was devised and produced by Michael Seal, with music by Ben Dawson. Next week is a very special episode, as the podcast reaches episode 100. I usually, at this point, give you some idea as to who will be appearing next week, but all I will say is that my guest is English, and that he has received a knighthood from the Queen. But until then, bye-bye.